Good morning. Welcome to episode 92 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today, I've got a fresh mock draft for y'all. But first, let's break down the Travis Hunter smoke. Last week, there was a lot of rumors going around, rumors and not reports of any kind that Travis Hunter maybe potentially could fall to the fifth overall pick, which the Jacksonville Jaguars have in the 2025 NFL draft. But I'm a little unsure about this because there's a couple of assumptions that people are making with the overall assumption that Travis Hunter could fall to the fifth overall pick. The first one is that two quarterbacks will be taken in the top four picks, especially the top three picks between the Titans, the Browns, and the Giants. I do think that that is probably a fair assumption because I think that the worst kept secret, if you can even call it that, in the league is that Cam Ward will be the first overall pick, whether that's the Titans or maybe the Giants or another team trade up, maybe even the Browns. But Cam Ward is expected to be the first player off the board, the quarterback for Miami. And Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback from Colorado, is kind of sort of not even really considered a first-round prospect by a lot of people, but obviously because of positional value, he and the rest of the quarterback class will get bumped up. And so I think that the Browns would certainly be interested just because they're probably the most analytically pilled organization in the NFL. And so I don't think that they would miss or not take a swing on a quarterback when they have such a good chance to take one at the number 2 overall pick, even if this is a pretty weak quarterback class relative to other years. You don't always get the number 2 overall pick, especially considering the Browns are keeping Myles Garrett. They signed him to a contract extension earlier this offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns end up taking a quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants take one either, considering how head coach Brian Daboll and their general manager Joe Schoen are both very much on the hot seat and need to win pretty much immediately in order to save their jobs. So I do think that there's a lot of credence to both Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders being taken in the top 4, which means that Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter would be the consensus top 2 prospects available. And I think that where all this smoke is coming from is that if, let's say, the quarterbacks go top 2 and then the Giants take Abdul Carter. So in a world, there is a decent chance that Travis Hunter makes it to the 4th overall pick. Whether he makes it past that 4th overall pick, I'm not very confident about because we're assuming that the Patriots would have other players graded as highly as Travis Hunter, which I think is a very big assumption. I think that the majority of teams, if not all teams, will have Hunter and probably Abdul Carter as kind of a class above the rest of the non-quarterbacks. And so even if the Patriots do have another player prospect that they like as much as Travis Hunter, and they're willing to take a non-Travis Hunter guy because Travis Hunter maybe doesn't fill as big of a need as another guy that they like. Even if that's a scenario, I think that the biggest assumption that people are making is that no team would trade up in front of the Jaguars to the 4th overall pick to get Travis Hunter. Because again, if Travis Hunter does make it to the 4, which I think, sure, that is pretty possible, I think that if the Patriots aren't interested in taking him, then they're going to be picking up the phone and looking to trade back, especially considering even if they do have a really good young quarterback, they've got a lot of other roster holes. It's not like they just have their left tackle spot to fill and that's it. Patriots, I think, would certainly be smart to trade back, add draft capital, have more swings at the plate. And so I don't really see it with Travis Hunter. I certainly do think the Jags would sprint to the podium if Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter were there at 5. I think I might have said in the past that I was a little iffy on whether the Jaguars would take Abdul Carter if he fell, because I figured if he fell that far, maybe he's falling for a pretty serious reason. But I don't know, unless it's like Jalen Carter and he has a very, very serious auto incident. I don't think that there's anything on Abdul Carter's profile that should make him fall past 5, let alone get to 5. So, I think the Jaguars, again, will take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter if they're there, but I have a hard time seeing that as a real possibility, mostly because I think that if either of them are there at 4, then the Patriots will either take them or trade back and let another team take them in front of the Jaguars. So, with all that said, let's get into the mock draft that I have for this morning. Went on PFF again. First pick, Will Campbell. Mason Graham was available, and I think that it's another fair assumption for people to think that if Mason Graham is there and Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are not there, then the Jaguars will take Mason Graham, especially after free agency when they added 2 starting quality offensive linemen, but didn't add any new free agents to the defensive line. And so objectively, Jacksonville's biggest need is pass rush. But they can get pass rushers later in the round, and I think that although like all signs are pointing to Mason Graham, you certainly can't make assumptions about the NFL draft, especially at this point. We're 31 days away from the draft. Maybe once we get a little bit closer, we can start writing things in. But yeah, I went with Will Campbell over Mason Graham, just kind of switch it up because, again, I think it's more likely that the Jags take Mason Graham, but I don't think it's written in stone, set in stone. I think that they could certainly take Will Campbell or Armand Membu or an offensive lineman of their choosing, especially if they have positional versatility, and just have them maybe compete against like Walker Little in training camp, or at least compete against someone for a starting job and just add competition to the offensive line. I think certainly is not a bad thing. So first round pick went with Will Campbell. In the second round, I think that in terms of trades, the Jaguars were a pretty good trade back candidate in the first round until the Las Vegas Raiders traded for Geno Smith. Of course, the Raiders could take a quarterback in this class since Geno is 33 years old, I want to say. He's definitely over 30. But the Raiders, since they do have a starting quarterback on the roster in Geno Smith, they don't feel like they have to take a quarterback in the first round. And so that doesn't give the Jaguars a lot of power, because not a lot of teams are going to be super amped to trade up in front of the Raiders at 6 to get the Jaguars' pick at 5. But I think that the second round is a really good area to see a potential trade back for the Jaguars. Obviously, we saw them trade back 2 times. Was it last year? I think it was the Brenton Strange class where they traded back twice and then got Brenton Strange. I feel like Trent Baalke also traded back another time in the second round, but it's slipping my mind. But the second round is certainly a good place to trade back, because I don't think that a lot of teams will have necessarily like 32 first round grades in each and every class. But at the same time, there's always like a handful of guys that slip out of the first round and are kind of like the belle of the ball of the second round that not just fans get excited about, but teams get excited about potentially moving up for. And so I traded away the Jaguars' 36th pick for the Seahawks' 50th pick and their 82nd pick so a second rounder for a second rounder and a third rounder. Just to echo James Gladstone's comments at the NFL Combine, they do want to add draft capital. They do want to have more swings at the plate. And so I think that the best or the fairest assumption that we could make is that the Jaguars will be picking at 5th overall. I'll be pretty surprised if they moved up or down from that pick. But trading down in the second round, I think, is a very real possibility. And so with the 50th pick, which was originally Seattle's, I went with JT Tuamailoa from Ohio State, who I believe I've taken in a mock draft before. I think that he's going to be a pretty, how do I say it, like up and down profile, in that like some people will love him and some people will hate him. Some people will turn on the tape and see that he's not doing Von Miller ghost moves and doesn't have Von Miller's bend around the corner and stuff like that. JT is definitely more of like, to oversimplify it, almost like Trayvon Walker type model, where he's really good at power rushing, has a couple counters off of that, but really more so he's a true pocket pusher. And I think that that's the Jaguars, something the Jags will be looking for, especially as they just add depth to their pass rush rotation. But I also think JT is the kind of intangibly rich prospect the Jaguars will be looking for, kind of guy that always plays the whistle, doesn't take a play off. And so I think that if the Jaguars don't take Mason Graham with the first round pick, then you could certainly expect them to take some kind of pass rusher on day 2. So with my third round pick, 70th overall, this was originally the Jaguars' pick, went with Tate Rowledge, the interior offensive line prospect out of Georgia. I think he's been getting a little bit of hype recently just because people really appreciate his play on film, in terms of kind of similar to JT, honestly. He's got great finishing ability, definitely has a nasty edge to him. And so PFF gave me a D for this pick because it was a bit of a reach on their consensus mock draft board. But I wouldn't be shocked if Tate Ratledge was picked before the 70th pick. And I think that for a lot of people, he's like a top 2 or top 3 interior offensive line prospect. So I'm pretty happy about really bulking up the trenches with the 2 of the first 3 picks here in this mock. With a third rounder, 82nd overall from the Seahawks, went with wide receiver Jalen Royals from Utah State. Pretty sure Utah State is where Puka Nacua came out of college. Obviously, a really good draft pick for the Rams, where James Gladstone came from. Certainly wouldn't compare them, Jalen Royals and Puka Nacua, like stylistically. But I think that Jalen Royals, despite being a little bit smaller, does have the ability to block. I don't know about blocking like in line as like a pseudo tight end, the way that like we imagine that Chris Godwin or Cooper Kupp might if they join the team as free agents. But Jalen Royals, I think, can definitely provide a lot of versatility. Definitely a great playmaker. I think he's been getting a lot of good smoke recently because Steve Smith ranked him highly on his rankings recently and had a good point about how his quarterback play, especially last year, was just horrific. And so you got to really watch the tape. That's one of the many reasons to actually turn the games on, and not just turn on games for Jalen Royals, but to turn on games for everyone to be able to compare and contrast across the class. But Jalen Royals, definitely a guy that I have my eye on as someone that I think would be a really good mid-round receiver fit for the Jaguars. I was thinking about taking a receiver earlier in this mock because I have seen some, not just rumors, but reports from beat reporters in Jacksonville that I think the Jaguars are seriously considering taking pass catcher earlier, like potentially in the second round instead of the third round. But either way, I would certainly expect the Jaguars to come away with a pass catcher by the end of day 2. So Jalen Royals, welcome to Jacksonville. Third round pick, 88th overall. I went with Texas safety Andrew Mukuba, who I think is perhaps the best quote unquote free safety. I think that in general, we probably need to get away from like free safety versus strong safety, because like kind of gone are the days of like having one Earl Thomas or one Cam Chancellor, where they're really fitted into those roles of like one guy's playing deep and one guy's playing closer to the line of scrimmage. Nowadays, you really want guys who are, again, for the buzzword of the day, versatile, and can play split field and cover half of the field deep, but then also come up, provide really good run support closer to the line of scrimmage. But with that said, I think Andrew Mukuba is probably the best quote-unquote free safety in the class, or arguably best free safety. I guess Malachi Starks is very good. But Mukuba, I think, should be taken certainly higher than the 88th overall pick. He was a really productive player, not just at Texas, but also before at Clemson. He transferred to Texas because he felt he wasn't being challenged enough at Clemson, apparently. But really good production, good athleticism, good instincts, just really good starting caliber safety that I think I found in the third round. And so I know Billy Bauman has a lot of shows, a lot of fans from commenters of the show. There's another guy available. Oh, Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State was also available. Would really be happy if the Jaguars took him as well, or any of those 3 guys. But yeah, landed Mukuba in the third round. In the fourth round, pick 107, went with Oregon nose tackle Jamari Caldwell. This guy does not add a ton of pass rush juice. He's definitely more so kind of like a run clogger, run stopper. Seen a lot of comparisons to him. A lot of people comparing him to BJ Raji, or a BJ Raji light, former playmaker for the Green Bay Packers. And so I think that Caldwell is just a guy that's been a little bit slept on in general during the draft process. I think that he's, again, to kind of oversimplify it compared to a current Jags player, kind of like pre-injury Devon Hamilton, where he's immediately going to be a really nice run stuffer for you and can provide a little bit of juice, like if you really need him to, but realistically, you'd probably like someone else being on the field for third and fourth downs in passing situations. But for a fourth rounder to get what I think is a really good run stuffer with upside, happy with getting Jamari Caldwell there. Then for my final 2 picks in this 5-round mock, I went with 2 more Longhorns, Texas tight end Gunnar Helm, who I was very surprised that he was still there. I think Gunnar Helm to some is like a top 3 or 4 tight end prospect. Definitely an intangibly rich guy. I think I shared this story before on a different mock draft Monday, but during the combine, I think he sprained his ankle and still did drills anyway. And so at first people were like, oh man, Gunnar Helm tested awful. But then when you consider that he tested on a bum ankle, then that makes you kind of think like, oh, this guy's really a competitor. He really cares. Kind of reminds me of Rome Odunze at the NFL Combine last year, where Rome, like, I think there was a drill that he did well at, but not as well as he wanted to. And so he stayed after just to continue working off to the side. And so I think that definitely struck a chord with a lot of teams of just the kind of work ethic that Odunze had. And so similarly, I think that showed Gunnar Helm's work ethic. I think that even though the Jaguars do have 3 rosterable tight ends on the roster between Brenton Strange and then the 2 they signed in free agency, Johnny Munt and Hunter Long from LA. Liam Cohen's Bucks did roster 4 tight ends in their initial 53-man roster last year. So I don't think it's absurd to think that the Jaguars could carry 4 tight ends in their 2025 roster, especially considering that Liam did it last year with the Bucks, but then also just how good of a draft class this is for tight ends. And then with the last pick, again, another Texas guy, quarterback Quinn Ewers, who met with the Jaguars, I think during the combine, not 100% sure, but I will plug Big Cat Country's prospect visits tracker because I think it's a really good resource for what we're doing right now, mock drafts. You can go to bigcatcountry.com and look at all the prospects that the Jaguars have officially met with throughout the process. There's always a handful of guys that appear on that list and then become Jaguars. Last year, the Jags met with Brian Thomas Jr., Jarian Jones, DeAndre Prince, Josh Cephas. That's off the top of my head. There might be one other one. But I think even like – so Quinn Ewers is a name that has met with the Jaguars, which is part of the reason that I added into this list. But also I think that you can take a look at the positions that the team meets for and kind of get hints from that. And so last season, the Jaguars met with Brian Thomas twice, and they also met with who's like the North Carolina speedster? Walker? He got drafted by the Ravens, but there was a speedster from North Carolina that the Jaguars also met with twice. And so this is easier to say in hindsight, but I think the Jaguars' plan was to get Brian Thomas in the first round. And if that didn't happen and they went with something else, then their backup plan, especially for adding speed to the offense, would have been that cat out of North Carolina. And so you can in that vein, like the Jaguars were clearly looking for a downfield vertical threat at wide receiver, and they ended up with Brian Thomas. But you can kind of see like what positions and what types of players at those positions the Jaguars might be interested in by looking at the prospects that they visited with. And so for today, like Quinn Ewers, even if the Jaguars don't take him specifically, they have met with multiple quarterbacks already. So I certainly would not be surprised at all if Jacksonville does spend a day 3 pick on a quarterback. I do like Nick Mullins as a free agent pickup, but I feel like his biggest, calling card or biggest positive is just the fact that he has a relationship with the current coaching staff and current offense coordinator Grant Udinski. But I don't know. I think that the Jaguars could certainly look to improve that position, especially considering that Trevor Lawrence has not finished the season healthy for back-to-back years now. UCF Jaguar said, what's up, UCF Jaguar? Any shot Jackson Dart could get drafted in the top 4? No, I don't think so. But I do think I'm glad you asked this because I was thinking about saying it earlier. I think that honestly the most realistic scenario that Travis Hunter does fall to the 5th overall pick is that if Jackson Dart ends up being taken in the top 3 or 4. Like I think that the scenario would be the Titans stay at 1 and they take Cam Ward. The Browns stay at 2 and they take Shedeur Sanders. As I talked about at the beginning of the show, I think that it makes a lot of sense for both those 2 teams to take a quarterback. And then if the Giants kind of like panic, if they miss out on Aaron Rodgers and they're not content with Russell Wilson or whoever they end up with, or I guess they got Jameis Winston. So I don't know. I feel like they'll probably just end up writing it out with Jameis Winston and maybe take a later round quarterback. But I think the scenario of the Giants kind of panicking and not having either the top 2 quarterbacks available to them and then just saying, screw it, let's take Jackson Dart now rather than waiting around later, then that would mean the Patriots would have their choice between Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter with the 4th pick, and then the Jaguars will be able to take whoever the Patriots don't take with the 5th pick. So, yeah, If you want more of my explanation of why Travis Hunter, or why I don't expect Travis Hunter to fall to 5, go back to the top of this show. But that'll do it for now. Yeah, I think that's all I got. Appreciate everyone for watching and listening. As always, we'll be back tomorrow with Hayes Carline at 9:04 a.m. Eastern. I feel like I had one other thing to say, but I guess not. All right. See you guys. Have a good one. Go Gators.